Hi,
Hello,
Melanie.
hello everybody, and thank you so much for spending time with me again today. I am super excited because today I'm having a conversation with Colleen Mulrooney. Colleen, perhaps you can introduce yourself to everybody and just give us some context for today's conversation.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm also excited to chat to you. You've been someone that I've been following on social media for a long time, and I have been fascinated by your journey, and I'm interested in the work that you do. So when I saw that I could ask you anything, I was like, yes, I'm in. So I am a creative. I'm an animal artist. I've been doing pet portraits, which you can see in the background, for about 30 years. But I'm a petpreneur. That's the space that I work in. I work with pet loss and bereavement, and I coach people through the loss of their animals. And I've tried to marry my two interests, which is animals and my creativity, which I've done through the arts. But where the commonality comes in for me with you and my interest in what you do is in clothing and in fashion, actually. So back in the day, I studied graphic design, but I was really torn and I was really drawn to doing fashion, which I never did. But on the side, I was always making my own clothes as a student, didn't have a lot of money. And where that came from was from my gran. I was inspired by her. She was a dressmaker. And I spent a lot of time with her when I was little. And so while all the other kids at nursery school were wearing, I guess, the equivalent of Woolies clothes and so on, I was dressed very differently. And I was teased mercilessly for it because I looked so different. So she would take her offcuts and she would make me, she would sew for me, and I would be like a mini version of what she was wearing, which were these really beautiful clothes that in those days you would dress up and you would go to town on a Saturday morning and you'd be like in your fine clothes. And so I was dressed in all these fine clothes and I was just teased so horribly. But that's my love of fashion and my love of the handmade story came back into my life as a student. And I would take all kinds of fabrics and I would make myself and design myself my own clothes. And so it's been a bit of a background thing. It's definitely taken a backseat over the years. But I've always kept an eye on what you're doing because I've been drawn to it from the creative background, from the printing, the dyeing, the fabrics, and so on. So that's how the two are really, in a weird way, are married.
That's such an interesting story to me because I heard you say more than once that you were teased mercilessly, and yet you still hold on to the value and the love that your grandmother invested in making those garments for you. So
Wow.
that's lovely that you didn't allow that negative experience to shut down your ability to enjoy the positive side of the experience for you also.
It very much took a backseat over the years. So the last time I did any of that was when I was a student, which is so sad, which is maybe why I've kept this connection and which is why I followed you. But I feel like it's coming back now as a, I can feel it. It's really starting to come back to the fore. So that's great, yeah.
Are you maybe ready to launch a clothing range?
Do you know, there was a thing that I watched on, I can't remember what it was called. It was a British fashion reality TV thing where they had teams of two and they would put themselves against each other and everyone had a theme that they had to sew according to the week. And I watched it in December. What was it called? Next in Fashion. And I was just so inspired. I was just like, that's exactly what I want to do.
Okay. It's happening.
I know I'm really creative and I enjoy doing creative stuff, and I've just never lost that love of fashion. So who knows?
So I think what has changed for us is our parents were in a generation where their careers were much longer and had much longer cycles. So people would have a job or a career for 4 decades and do much the same thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think today, with technology accelerating things the way it does, and with us being able to explore so many things through the internet, I think our
Yes.
career cycles are shorter. So I know
Yeah.
for me, I like to reinvent myself every 4 or 5 years.
Okay, great.
If
Yeah.
I'm still doing what I was 10 years ago, I want to shoot myself.
That's, yeah, I can really relate to that, because I also feel that boredom. I don't like being bored. There's always something new. I think it's very much a creative thing where we're driven and we move forward. But so that's actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them is your early years as an entrepreneur, because obviously you've now evolved so much from there. And the other thing, which I think is very fascinating, is how you worked with Marianne Fassler at some point. So she's one of my creative heroes, and I just think she's this incredibly talented individual who makes no apology for the individual statement that she makes. And she must have really influenced you, and I'm curious to hear how.
Okay, so let's start with your first question then. My early years as an entrepreneur. So my dad was an entrepreneurial architect, and when I was little, very little, he would take me to his office during December holidays with him when all his staff were off, and he would let me answer the phone for him. So if anybody phoned there in December, they got this tiny child's voice answering the phone. Ian Brummer Architects, how can I help you? Can I put you through? And I remember sitting there. It was cold, so he had a little heater going for me, and all wrapped up, and waiting the whole day, watching that phone for the 2 or 3 times that it would ring, so that I could feel like part of the process. And I think that from those early experiences, it kind of embedded in my DNA that thinking that I could be entrepreneurial too, that I could do it for myself, because he when I was very little, he took me to his office with him and included me in the narrative, and my dad was always somebody who said to me, you can do this, my girl, you know, whatever you want, you can have it, just go for it, you know. And he did point out that I should have realistic goals, that I was going to reach for the stars and likely just get to the top of the nearest tree. And he always said to me that it would be worth trying anyway. So I think that was what inspired me to start my first business. And what basically happened was that I left school and I tried a bunch of things. I tried a bunch of jobs, random jobs that I got. I spent about 4 years working in casinos, which was ghastly. And then one day I was like, well, self-employed's got to be better than unemployed. And with no real CV to speak of, I may as well start with a clean slate and go forth. If I had had any clue what I was really doing, I think it might have been different. But I had no clue and a bunch of courage, so I just set off and did things and learned the hard way. So I was very. I think
that's the beauty of it.
Yes. I was very naive and pretty arrogant. And the process has knocked the corners off me.
But I think those are the qualities that you need, because that's the launch pad into it, isn't? You need that energy. You need those, because you don't have anything else. You have no idea where you're going. You have no idea what you're going to do or how you're going to get there. So you need something to propel you forward. Did you know that it was going to be a joint venture between being an entrepreneur and being creative?
No. And I didn't really know. I didn't really know how I was going to shape it. I had no business plan. I had a book that had 4 pages of instructions about tie-dye. And
Okay.
I had enough money for 20 t-shirts.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
bought them and I sold them, and then I went and bought more, and I kept replacing and adding a bit more
Wow.
until I think by the time I closed the business, I had like, I don't know, 300 garments in stock holding.
Okay.
That I'd built up over 6 or 7 years. From that initial 350 bucks.
Wow.
So when people say to me they can't start a business because they can't get a grant or they can't get money, that is just a mindset. I've never been the right demographic to get the money that I've applied for.
Okay. Okay.
I've always been told for some reason why they can't give me the grant or why they can't give me the money. So I gave up with that process a long time ago, and have always just, I've grown the business of customers.
Yes. Okay. Were you Joburg based?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I think that's quite a typical entrepreneurial story. That is how things just began in those days. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media.
Yes.
So you obviously had to sell to customers. Where did you find them, and where were you selling those? Where did you sell those first better t-shirts?
Mostly friends and family. Yes. And I used to go to an exercise class in the morning. My teacher allowed me to bring the t-shirts and sell them to my fellow classmates for like, I think 2 years or something. She was amazing.
That's incredible.
And then I went to flea markets. I inveigled my way into different markets, and that was also a process of testing which ones were going to work for me and which ones didn't. And also a very direct process of, okay, I have this much money this week, I can afford a table here. I'm going to make sure I have enough fuel and resources to get myself there on Saturday and Sunday, and then we'll see what transpires on Monday. I'll then take what I made and go to my suppliers and buy what I need. And
I think it creates. See how
I fit the next week's costs into last week's turnover.
I love this so much because it really is a good grounding for understanding cash flow and how things work and what resources you have available and where to use them. So you sold that, you said. You sold your t-shirt business eventually.
No, I actually just closed it down. What happened was I worked myself. So in my 20s, I had no business skills. I know my father was entrepreneurial, but he didn't teach me much about entrepreneurship and that's because he also didn't have many mentors. My dad really had no mentors. He was out there alone, fishing on his own. So I actually think I probably have way more mentors than he would have had back then. But in the 1990s, I had no mentors and no clue. So I really, really worked in a vacuum, and I didn't think about business modeling. I just threw myself at that wall and did it until I burned out. So it was only later in my career that I started learning that you don't have to burn out, you need to change. You know, when you're reaching that point in your business where you can't make it go further unless you burn out, then you need to change something. And to understand what those signs look like, and to be courageous enough to make the changes, because sometimes those changes involve you letting go of existing revenue streams. Because I find that what happens is I've got this that's making me money. Now I start evolving a new revenue stream. Then I get to a point in time where I'm spread too thin and I need to pick one. And then I need to go for the new one because the old one served its purpose. It's fading out for whatever reason. The new one's more interesting to me anyway, but there's a point where I have
Yes.
to choose, and then there's a revenue gap
Yes.
between
Yeah,
the
I'm
old.
familiar.
Does this sound familiar?
Yeah, everything that you're saying sounds very familiar. Yeah.
And now how do we survive that revenue gap? Because it feels like night. And there's a very real point in time where you have to choose, where you have to go, okay, I'm actually now confident enough that the new thing is what I want to back, and the old thing no longer serves me, and you have to cut it away. And very often watch the money going down river with it.
So that takes courage. That takes courage, and it takes trust, and it takes some kind of internal belief in yourself that you're gonna grab that vine and it's gonna swing you out, and you're gonna be okay. You're not actually going to die.
Yes. Yes.
The entrepreneur's journey.
Yes. Yes. And also a little bit of well, maybe this won't work. You know, if it doesn't, are my risks limited? Do I know who's going to suffer if this goes wrong? Are they ready for it? Have I had the discussion with them? You know, everybody in the system needs to know.
Okay.
I need to know, and also be ready to fail. So for me, those have been the hardest lessons when I've built things. So one of my mentors for a period was Alon Reyes from Reyes Corp. And I remember very clearly sitting in one of his lessons one day, and he said he feels that movie Field of Dreams is possibly one of the worst things that's ever happened to entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Because we all walk around going, if we build it, they will come. And when they don't come, it is devastating. Because then how do we adjust, and how do we react in time to save our families? Because it's all very well and good saying I'm this brave entrepreneur over here, but I've got a family behind me relying on me for income.
So flexibility is also important. It's also knowing if, it doesn't look like this is going to work, then I need to shift over here, look at the big picture, not be laser focused always.
Yes.
But to notice where else you can move to.
And there are also different entrepreneurship styles. You need to figure out which is yours. So some entrepreneurs will go, okay, I'm going to set a goal. If this doesn't bear the fruit that I expected to by this date, I'm going to abandon it.
Yes.
Now I'm not that kind of entrepreneur.
Okay.
I don't abandon any of my chickens ever.
Okay.
I find it very difficult to do that. So what I will do is I will let an idea go dormant and then resurface it in a different iteration later.
Yes. I feel like if they show up, they do want a voice and they do want expression in the world, but their time might not be now. They might be ahead of their time. And so then they can reappear and resurface later.
Yes. And that timing thing is so important. You've got to realize that it might not be your time. Somebody else might get lucky, come in at the same time in the market as you, just after, just before. You can't control all that stuff. If it's not your lucky day, it's not your lucky day. You know?
So it sounds like it's really been a journey for you, and you have lived it to the fullest. That's what it sounds like. That's what I'm hearing. And you've reinvented yourself, and you've changed along the way, and you've obviously grown this enormous skill set. But I'm interested to know, so you were marketing to clients and to customers as much as you could in the days before social media. How have you used those tools and skills from those early days in growing your social media now? Because you've done just incredible things. I mean, your most amazing thing is your Upcycled Cloth Collective group with almost 103,000 members. That is just, I've got goosebumps.
So do I.
It's such a remarkable achievement. Like, what have you used from back then that works now in this weird social media space?
So perhaps at this point, it's worth explaining to you how I contacted Marianne Fassler, because it is the same mindset that has created my online networks. And that is through disciplined daily practice, one contact at a time.
Wow.
So when I mentioned that I'm burned out at the end of my selling at markets phase in my career, and I kind of went underground and got a job for a bit, and then relaunched the business in a different modeling, where instead of owning all of the stock, I was more like a dry cleaner. So I decided to approach fashion designers and take their goods and put my finishes on. So they would bring me a white blank, and then I would transform it for them and give it back to them dyed or printed or whatever the spec was.
That is such a genius thing to do.
Absolute genius when you have no resources.
Okay. Necessity being the mother of invention.
Absolutely. And what I could afford was a landline at that time. It was just before cell phones. Like, cell phones were still babies, big, heavy things.
Big babies.
Bricks back then. So a landline was still how we did business. And I put in a landline where I was staying, and I got a telephone directory. And I phoned every single clothing company I could find in the telephone directory. Between A and L, I stopped at L. L was where I stopped the process. So, but what I did was I would sit with a little ruler and go down, and if I saw anything clothing related, I would phone and say, hello, could I please speak to your buyer? And I'd introduce myself to the buyer, and then I'd have to explain to them what I do, which back then was unheard of. Like, I give you my stuff and you do what with it? So there was a process that I had to explain to them. So I didn't always get a meeting, but if I could, I would get a meeting with them. And I had this red suitcase with very tiny inadequate wheels that I would drag everywhere with me, and it would burst open and all these colored fabrics would burst out. I'd be hot and bothered because I'd been driving around looking for the place for an hour, because there weren't GPSs back then either. All that technology that you have to support you is not there. And so what I would do is I would phone as many clothing companies as I could, and then I would line up meetings on a particular day, and then I would try and go and see as many of them as I could, and hope that the car didn't break down, because I had a real clapped up car back then. I would go and see these people and try and talk them into letting me do stuff for them. And some of them did. I went to see corporate clothing companies and fashion designers and all sorts. There's a whole bunch that happens between A and L.
Okay.
But I got lucky at L because I found the number of leopard frock.
Okay.
And I phoned to speak to the buyer, and I didn't back then. I was so naive and ignorant. I did not even know it was Marianne Fassler's brand. I had no idea of the landscape that I'd entered. I was still just winging it. You know, I had a telephone book that'll give me the answers.
What else was there? There wasn't anything else.
There wasn't anything else. So when I got to L, I got through to leopard frock, and I spoke to Jocelyn, who was the buyer back then, and she said, please come and see us. Because, of course, they understood what I was talking about. They were already using dye houses and printers. And I'll never forget the day I got there, because I saw this fancy house in Saxonwold, and here in my clapped out car, and of course I had that moment at the gate where I was like, okay, no, I'm just going to go home. It's okay. This is too frightening. And then I went in, and they were, Marianne has a very, very, very generous way of supporting up and comings, anybody who's intensely creative and who shows a genuine, need to make stuff. She will connect with, and there will be work. There will be work with her. Whenever you go into her studio, she's got interns there. I've had a long relationship with her now over many years, and there are always interns in her space. The people who work for her love working with her. They stay there for decades. She doesn't have a very high turnover of staff at all.
Wow. That's telling.
Yes, and it was always a pleasure to work for her and with her. She's always a lady. Maintains her cool in every situation, and absolutely dedicated to what she does.
She's remarkable.
It was my lucky acorn. It was my lucky acorn. Because of course, once I had that, it was very easy to sell to anybody else in the industry.
Yeah. So you liked you took your dye ideas and you asked for her garments and you created.
Yeah, so essentially I showed her what I could do, and then she would say, okay, here's a picture, can you replicate this? Or this is something we've drawn, can you do something that looks like that? Or I mostly worked on her children's range, the Sabella label, which was wonderful for me because she wasn't going to do ongoing work that was tie-dyed. It could become quite dated looking. So she would use tie-dye in features and trims mostly. But with the children's collection, I had weekly work.
Wow.
I would drop off and pick up every week for about 4 years that I was going there almost on a weekly basis, doing little T-shirts and little kiddie stuff. It was so cute. It was really wonderful.
So the risk paid off. The chance that you took paid off, and it paid dividends. Totally. And how did she? Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
No. The risk totally.
How did she inspire you? And because her style is just so unique. There's she's a one of a kind. So what was it that you learned from her that inspired you from a work ethic or a creative point of view?
So from a creative point of view, she taught me that you could put screaming pink, orange, and red together and it's okay.
That's why I love her.
So I was actually thinking about it this morning. Some of the fun things that I did with her was when I first started working with her, shweshwe was only available in navy and brown. And we did early experiments where she gave me shweshwe that we over dyed with the pinks and the reds and the yellows to get different color combinations. And then after that, they started making more colorful shweshwe.
I had no idea that was the origin. I remember that.
Do you remember that changeover?
Yes, and I was like, oh yes, because I love pattern and color. Saturated color is my thing. So I had no idea that was the origin. Wow.
Yes. So she wanted more color in the shweshwe. I did the early experiments where we over dyed some stuff, and of course there was at that time when everybody was using shweshwe. So like in 2 or 3 seasons, it just boiled out there.
Goosebumps. Timing. Earlier, the right time.
Totally. In terms of business, she was an absolute lady. She paid on time every time. And that for me was awesome. In an industry where sometimes getting payments out of designers was challenging.
Okay.
To work with a designer who just paid on time every time.
Wow. It's wonderful having a client like that.
Yes, yes, absolute lady to deal with. Yes.
Okay. And then where did you obviously have a love of print as well. And by prints, I mean printing patterns and hand printing and creating patterns. Where did that come from?
I would have to say the early origins would come off the tiles in the bathroom in the house that I grew up in.
I totally relate to that.
They weren't even
completely know what you mean.
They weren't even very pretty ones. They were a horrible color. But as a child, I used to watch those patterns and how they repeated. And when I, as an adult, realized that I could do that and control how those patterns repeated, I got super excited.
Your brain just went.
Yeah, so I tried one or two, and then when I figured out the simple principles that drive it, I was like, oh, this isn't as difficult as I thought. Oh, this is easy. Oh, look.
So who knew? Who would have thought that those awful 1970s bathroom and kitchen tiles actually had a purpose?
Generations.
That is fascinating, and that's one of the things that I enjoy most is seeing the pattern making process. How you've done it, and it's the repeat that just makes it so beautiful.
Yes, and I've also creatively, my career has shifted in interesting ways. The first part of my career was all about mass production and getting as much out as I possibly could in as short a time as I possibly could and within a budget. So there were all these restraints around the process. So what I'm enjoying about my career now, where I'm doing more content creation and not mass producing product, is that I get to sometimes make things to me from me, and they can take as long as they need to be born into the world. I'm stitching on a dress now that I've been sewing on for months and actually years now. And I was thinking the other day, like, what's the point of this, Mel? You just keep going with it, and it's fully satisfying. It's to me from me. For all those hours when I did overtime and did too much work for too little money and all of that, I'm now giving back to myself on the other side of the process.
I love that. It feels so satisfying and authentic, and it's very heartfelt.
I needed to spend some time giving back to myself.
No. It also ties into the very traditional historical journey of clothing, of how our grandmothers sewed before technology. And what I'm enjoying seeing is the resurgence in this, and how hand stitching has become a feature on clothing. I love it. I don't spend nearly enough time doing any of this, but I watch the videos. I find it, so I don't spend a lot of time doing it, but it's an idea whose time has come. It's a recycled idea. We're recycling clothing. We're not putting it in landfills. And it's also a way of honoring just fabric and feel and what you're talking about now. It's not mass production. It's authenticity, and it's creative in its own development, in its own style. It's like a whole vibe all on its own. It's like a real standalone creative process.
So I think for me, every single item of clothing is a narrative. And it's got a long story. It's got a story of all the different people who were involved in the production. And then it's got all of those memories connected to the person who wears that garment. And if you wear that garment for 30 years, and I've got some garments that I've been wearing for that long, there are 30 years worth of memories, 30 years worth of stories. So for me, our garments connect our past and our future. They're far more significant, I think, than that whole fast fashion story has led us to believe. That whole thing, oh, you've got to be in this season's trends, and next season you can't be seen dead in them. I prefer to connect with garments that I feel comfortable and confident in, and that will serve me in a classic way, no matter what season trends are doing.
Sure. Yeah. It is. It's a far more holistic. It's not clothing. It is clothing because it's a garment and you put it on, but it's actually part of you. It's part of your own identity.
Yes.
It's part of who you are. It's like you say, it's a narrative, and it sort of goes beyond just you as a person.
Yes.
It's part of your identity.
Yes. So I used to do team building events into the corporate space. And
of course you did.
there were a few things that I set out to do because they were like, tie-dye is only for hippies. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take it to the catwalk and I'm going to take it to the corporates, and I'll show them.
Remarkable.
So I would take it into the corporate space, and then I'd have these guys in suits going, this is not for me. This is not for me. And then I'd say to them, okay, I know you think clothing is not for you, but would you leave home without your clothing in the morning? You might feel it's not for you, but take it away and you will notice.
Yeah.
So
that must have been really interesting, coercing corporates into getting their hands dirty and doing tie-dye. Like, how did you, like, conceptually, like, how?
So I dressed it up as a charity event, and we made.
I dressed it up. I love that.
we made T-shirts for children in orphanages.
Genius.
Yes, and they got to have that like colorful wow moment that kind of busts them out of themselves a little, and make something beautiful that they can give away to a kid who's going to enjoy something special. So
that's what I'm really enjoying about you. I mean, there's stuff here that I didn't know about, but my brain works in a similar way to yours. Like there's always a creative solution to whatever the problem is. That's what I'm hearing. Yes. So you apply your creativity, whichever way you turn, by the sounds of things.
Yes. So a lot of people, and I think this is maybe the challenge for a lot of startups, is that they think they have to have a business plan, a grant, and then they have to do that and get to certain outcomes. And that's one way of building businesses.
Sure.
I have another way. And that is to say, okay, in an ideal world, what would I like to do? Okay, I can't do that today. What version of that can I do with what I have? And if it's a bit scrappy, that's okay. It's what I've got.
I think that's a very African way of doing things. I think that's how we do things in this country. You just make do with what you've got, and you build it from there.
Yes. And I can work much more efficiently with resources than with somebody who's had all those the grants and the money and all the stuff, because give me that grant and I'll show you what I'll do with it, because I wouldn't go and spend it on all that stuff.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's very often why I don't these days go and apply for grants or anything like that, is I don't know I wouldn't want to begin to define a project with a specific outcome, because I've tried so many things that haven't worked. And if this doesn't work, then I have to explain to somebody why, because now I've spent their money.
Yeah.
You know, business is a crapshoot. Like, it may not work. This may not work. You'd better be very sure of your strategy if you're going to put your money or somebody else's behind it. And as long as it is just an idea that you would like to try out, minimize your risks, test it small before you put a chunk of investment behind it.
Yeah. So you've what I'm really hearing is you're speaking from experience. You've really been there and you've done that, and you've walked the journey. And what I'm also hearing is there's a book in this. We need like another book, and not a clothing book or a dyeing book, but an actual like Melanie's journey. Book. Yes.
I've started it, but it's been shelved for a while. But I think one day it will. It's one of those that's going to resurface again.
Yeah. And there's so much rich information here. It's a beautiful South African entrepreneurial story. That's what I think. I remember, I think you and I are the same age. And so I remember what those early days were like at flea markets. And that was the buzz. There was nowhere else. You know, you either bought it your typical, we didn't really even have malls in those days.
Yes.
You know, you went to town and you went to the shop, and that was the thing. But where were people gathering? That was, I guess, the social media of the day, was going to the Bree Street flea markets and hanging out there on a Saturday morning and connecting that way.
Yes. I'm not sure whether the social networks. I do think they actually support those ecosystems beautifully. I mean, I see what markets and things are able to do with Instagram, and I've got some friends who use social networking really, really well to promote what they do at markets. So it's become a supplement to the whole system, which I think is awesome. I think that as technology advances, we're going to find more and more ways to use it more powerfully. And I do think that startups today have way more resources, just intellectual resources. You know, you can YouTube or Google anything these days.
No, you have no excuse, really.
Yes.
Yeah, because everything is there at your fingertips. Well, Melanie, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed this. Wow, what a deep dive into someone who's so fascinating and so interesting. What a journey.
Yay. Thank you. I'm very happy you enjoyed that conversation. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, yeah, you did. Thank you. Just wow. Yeah, it's just, I find this so exciting. I find it so interesting. I'm fascinated by people with stories like this. There must be so many.
There are. And I actually need to pick it up again. I do video interviews from time to time with local clothing manufacturers, and I must do more of them, because there are some incredible clothing manufacturers in our country who've persevered through some very, very difficult years in the industry. And there's so much they can teach through their stories.
Yeah, it's incredible. I love it. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom and your energy and your love and your creativity and your passion. It's just love it.
It's such a pleasure. And maybe in closing, you'd like to tell everybody a little bit more about what you do, because it's been all about
similar journey that also went down the traditional path of, in fact, I was in magazine publishing. I was probably 12 when I picked up my first pony magazine, and I just fell in love, and I knew that that was what I wanted to do one day, and ended up, the universe is an amazing thing, and I ended up working for a company. In fact, it was Animal Talk magazine, and when they employed me, Animal Talk didn't exist yet, and I was an animal lover, have always been, and wanted to be in publishing, and it was just this very fortuitous opportunity where they said, oh, we're thinking of starting a pet magazine, which was just music to my ears. And my initial love and passion is horses. I mean, there are many loves and passions, and horses are one of them. And then years later, I said to them, you really need to do a pony magazine. And that original dream from when I was 12, when I picked up that magazine, came to fruition in about 2010. I think we started it, and I was able to create a pony magazine for kids who loved horses as much as I did, and it's still one of the most incredible achievements that I've done. And my inspiration, my love, and my passion, and my interest in horses and horses welfare all went into that, and all those years of learning about horses as a kid just was bundled in those. I think we did it for about 2 or 3 years. Unfortunately, it couldn't support itself. It's a very difficult, the publishing space is not, there's not a lot of money there. So that was the one thing that I did. And then I've done pet portraits since I left art school. That supported me. My portraits have supported me for many years, but not unlike you, they've had their time, and it's time to move on to different things and to evolve into different things, like working in the digital space, doing digital artwork. And then along the way, because I've been such an animal lover, I had these relationships with animals who changed my life. One of them was a big mare who was a racehorse, and she came to me. It was very, very difficult, and we struggled with each other for many years. And she was like my soulmate. She taught me more about myself as a person than certainly what I did in 12 years at school. And she was eventually bitten by a snake, and I had to put her down. And so that then sort of launched me into this other part of what is now becoming my career. And it's that idea of in and out and up and down. And over the years, because of the portrait work, I've helped people. People will come to me and they'll be like, can you draw me a picture of my animal? But I end up counseling them on their pet loss and their grief, because yes, they've had this relationship and they've lost this animal, and now they're struggling. And so that seems to have been like a very natural course for me. I've always gone back to it. And so that's what I'm focusing on now, and that's the direction that I'm going in. And because of my design background, I'm able to develop products for people to help them, visual products, journals, online stuff, and so on. So yeah, it's been a very interesting few years. I think that I'm finally hitting my stride. I spent years in employment where I did work in the publishing sector. Didn't really enjoy it that much because I'm not a desk person. I'm very much my own, want to do my own thing. And so, yeah, I'm a self-starter, and I've always been driven I've always had the ideas. There's always something cooking on a pot somewhere that's brewing. And I think I've followed the entrepreneurial journey. Like, I relate to a lot of what you've said. I don't know that I've been as brave as you to step out and just go at it, in the same way that you have. But I've also realized that I can't stay stuck and small. I've got to go out. You've got to go out of your comfort zone if you're going to go anywhere and get anything done. So that's where I am now.
So I really think that your grief counseling, there's a huge space for that. Yeah. I know plenty of my friends. I know for myself that when you lose a loved fur friend, it's very traumatic. So I think that it's a beautiful field to blossom into. And
I agree.
It feels to me like growing up from the portraits.
Yes, it's the next step. It's the next natural evolution. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for spending time with me, Colleen. I hope the hour was worth it.
Absolutely. Best hour spent. Loved it.
Yay.
Love it.
Thank you
Yay.
so
Yeah.
much for spending time with me
Melanie.
today. And for those of you who are watching, I will put Colleen's details into the description of this video on YouTube. Have a lovely day.
You too. Take care. Bye.